My name is Anne McElhenney.
And my name is Phelan McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelan Scoop.
Yes.
7.5 months into the 2-week lockdown, Phelan.
Yes.
Are you enjoying your lockdown, Phelan? Partial lockdown? We don't have too bad of a lockdown here, actually.
Unless you've tried to run a business.
Unless you try to run a business.
Yes.
Unless you try to run a pub or a restaurant or you want, or oh, by the way, or you try to run a cinema.
Or a church.
Or if you try to run a church. In today's show, Phelan, what are we doing?
Well, we have a fascinating and actually an important interview with journalist and publisher Roger Kimball about ObamaGate, the scandal, which seems to be getting bigger day by day. And we'll also be talking about ObamaGate, the movie, which is getting bigger day by day.
And coming out next week.
Coming out next week. Here's a little sample of the trailer. You can see it.
My wife has my phone.
Full-blown national security crisis.
Michael Flynn investigation still open, whoopsie face.
President Obama wants to know everything we're doing. Trump's not ever going to become president, right?
No, we'll stop it.
It's a really important story, and we're telling it really well and in a very entertaining way. And we'll talk about that during the interview.
Yes, we will.
And also in the show, Shots Fired, Shots Fired, the New York Times journalist Bret Stephens, and friend of this show, destroys the New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning 1619 project, and he destroys it in the New York Times, and his colleagues are not happy. And then his other colleagues are not happy with his unhappy colleagues. So it goes on and on.
And we have an intriguing interview with an author who almost accidentally discovered that the family scandal was actually a story of heroism.
Yes. One man's battle against eugenics and the racist fanatics who promoted it, but his history had portrayed him as the fanatic until he discovered the truth. We discussed the book about the subject and discuss also how it's scarily relevant to today.
It is, yeah, exactly. And we have a wonderful recipe at the very end of the show, which you have to hang on for that. By the way, you have to hang on for everything because it's a really packed show and a really great show.
It's a big show today. What's the recipe? Will we give them a little teaser about the recipe?
The recipe is a fig and goat cheese tostada fig and goat cheese tostada with a twist.
What's a tostada?
And basically, what it is I discovered this appetizer in a tapas bar near here, and I've been trying to back engineer it. So you'll see or taste, I hope, the results. Really nice, and figs are in season and magnificent. Okay,
so we first want to go to Roger Kimball. The interview we did it earlier. It's an important interview and it's an important story. But we want to tell you also about the ObamaGate movie. I know many of you are fans of it and fans of what we're doing, and we get all your letters and we get all your comments on YouTube, and we get all your comments on the app on the iPhone. So please keep those coming.
And by the way, thank you to everyone who has supported us in the making of the ObamaGate movie. It's incredibly important. It's very timely. People need to know what happened in the efforts to undermine first candidate and then President Trump.
Yeah.
So let's.
Well, actually, it's important to also say. Remember, it's the ObamaGate movie, but it's actually, and we discussed this in the interview. It's the BidenGate movie as well. But let's go over to the interview now with Roger. So we're joined now by Roger Kimball, who wears many hats. He's an art critic, a writer, a journalist, a publisher. He is the editor of the new Criterion magazine. He is the publisher of Encounter Books and the author himself of 7 or 8 books.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the greatest thinkers in American politics at the moment, and very prolific too. You can find him wherever good writing is. You'll find him, whether it's the
American Spectator, the Epoch Times,
Wall Street Journal, even the New York Times. But no one's perfect.
That's right.
So welcome to the show, Roger.
Welcome, Roger. Thank you so much for being here.
Your hyperbole does you credit.
So. We wanted to talk to you about ObamaGate. Obviously, we're doing the ObamaGate movie, and we wanted to really talk to you about why it's important, why the ObamaGate story is such a huge story. But before we talk about that in a general way, let's talk about the latest the latest part of the scandal, the mysterious amnesia that seems to affect FBI agents and the Mueller team, who all forgot the passwords of their phones, which led to their phones being wiped and not free for investigation. Tell us about that.
Well, it's sort of self-induced amnesia, isn't it? It reminds me a little bit of what Auric Goldfinger said to James Bond. He said, once Mr. Bond is a coincidence, twice is a happenstance, but three times is enemy action. And clearly that's what we have here. The nearly 30 government-issued smartphones that had been wiped or in some cases destroyed by FBI agents and others who were involved in the ObamaGate scandal is shocking. It's you don't really quite know how to get your arms around the scandal. Had someone on the other side done this, they would have been instant. The FBI would have come down on them like a ton of bricks. But of course, it's not just Peter Strzok and the despicable Andrew Weissman, who's responsible for the destruction of the Arthur Andersen accounting company and Enron, and is a kind of walking epitome of prosecutorial abuse. It's also, Hillary Clinton. What about those 33,000 emails that she deleted from an illicit homebrew server? She said that all these messages had to do with her daughter's wedding or yoga routines, which of course is preposterous on its face. And then when you add to that the fact that she employed industrial grade software, BleachBit, to wipe her server and instructed some of her minions to destroy some of the phones with a hammer. You're talking about not only obstruction of justice, but destruction of government evidence, writ large. It's appalling.
These are appalling people. And also, by the way, Hillary Clinton, being so disingenuous to talk about the wiping a phone. And she said, what, like with a cloth?
Everyone should Google that. Hillary Clinton wiping with a cloth. It's unbelievable.
Did you wipe the server?
What, like with a cloth or something?
I don't know. Well, you know how it works digitally. Did you try to wipe the whole server?
I don't know how it works digitally at all.
Just, not to get too far off topic here, Chelsea Clinton, if the emails were about Chelsea Clinton's weddings, in the John Podesta emails, if we all remember that were leaked, there was a whole, Chelsea initiated this big audit into the Clinton Foundation to see who was basically getting money when they shouldn't. And John Podesta said to his friends, you need to be careful. Tell Chelsea to be careful about auditing the Clinton Foundation because we might find out who paid for her wedding dress. Right. So if Hillary's emails were actually about Chelsea's wedding, that may be evidence of fraud using charitable money. So
now, she was the most corrupt, serious candidate for president in the nation's history, and I'm not forgetting about Aaron Burr and others.
ObamaGate is basically, was basically using, among other things, the false predicate of Russian collusion to try and undermine candidate Trump and President Trump. We know now that's a hoax. That even the Mueller team had to admit it didn't happen. But the big shock is that it seems the Mueller team knew this at the beginning of their investigation before they devoted 18 months
and $40 million of taxpayers' money
and destroying the lives of people.
The scandal that we began with, the wiping of the phones and the illicit email server and all of that, these are local scandals of the first water. But what really makes this whole story not just ordinary corruption, but in fact a serious challenge to our constitutional order. And for a couple of years now, I've said that this is the most serious political scandal in our nation's history. Why? Because this was a concerted effort to disrupt a presidential election, and by doing so, to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. When Donald Trump won in 2016, against the expectations of all the beautiful people. They knew Hillary was going to win, and therefore they didn't bother to really cover their tracks so much, because they knew, they owned the FBI. They were going to own the FBI well into the future. So this whole thing would never happen. But when Donald Trump won, then they swung into action, and the Mueller investigation, the false impeachment hearings, because President Trump talked to the president of Ukraine. It's just now the 25th Amendment again. It's just one thing after the next. They cannot abide the idea that someone not of their choosing won the election. Donald Trump won the presidency without their permission. This is unendurable. And what that means is I don't know that the public really quite appreciates yet how serious this is. What they are saying to us is, it doesn't matter how you voted. It doesn't matter who won the election fair and square. We determine who wins the election. We beautiful people, we denizens of the deep state, the administrative state, we are the ones who are charged with running your lives. And the fact that as you say, 35 or $40 million of taxpayer money was spent on this fraud that was known to be a fraud from the very beginning. That they opened FISA warrants, on American citizens. Why? Not because they were interested in Carter Page. They knew that Carter Page was a CIA asset. It was an FBI lawyer who doctored an email and inserted the word "not" into the email from the CIA. So he's not a CIA asset, but they knew he was. It's this kind of onion of lies right down to the very bottom of the investigation.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said the public don't know this. I mean, it's not well known in the public, and this is why we're doing the ObamaGate movie, is because people need to know this. And journalism is a great way of getting it out there, but so is entertainment. So the ObamaGate takes their text messages, takes their memos, takes the drama of the investigation and puts it on stage, puts it on film. And Dean Cain and Christy Swanson is in it. You can find out more by going to ObamaGateMovie.com. But, Strzok and Page are a wonderful example of the corruption at the heart of this. So two very senior FBI operatives who Strzok basically ran the Hillary Clinton email investigation and then started and ran the Russia investigation. And their text messages are not only, the media dismisses them as sort of downplays them as anti-Trump messages. They weren't. They were conspiratorial messages about how to stop Trump getting elected. And that's not hyperbole. They actually say, Trump's not going to win, is he? And Strzok text Page and says, no, we are going to stop it.
Yes, we are going to stop it. Who's we? The FBI? Yeah. The intelligence agencies of the United States are going to stop somebody from becoming president who's been elected? Think about what that means.
This isn't an invasion of their privacy, by the way. These are work phones that they're writing to each other on. They're having an adulterous affair, and this thing, and it's not like it's some guy in some, sub office of the FBI. This is the very, very senior level.
Head of counterintelligence.
So that's the guy saying, we'll stop it.
Yeah.
And the fact that this isn't the headline news everywhere is extraordinary. In the same way, by the way, as the wiping of the phones.
You haven't seen it on the front page of the New York Times every day? I'm shocked.
Yeah, but I mean, just to let people know, the ObamaGate movie is all this, but it's also, of course, Strzok and Page were having this adulterous affair. So their text messages read as a mixture of John le Carrier meets Teen Beat magazine.
Yes, and something from Anthony Weiner, yes.
Yes, oh God. Yeah, that really brings it down. So, this is a pattern from ObamaGate to Hillary Clinton, obviously wiping her emails. Do you think is anything going to change? Because it's very serious that people are seeing people not being punished for these offences. I mean, how bad is it that they're not being punished, and will anything change?
I don't know the answer to that, but I will make this observation. But first, a comment. I hope that you have. I hope that ObamaGate includes at least a cameo appearance from a person who was in that famous meeting in the Oval Office on January 5th. It was President Obama, Susan Rice, the national head of national security for Obama. It was James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper, head of director of national intelligence, and who else? Joe Biden. Joe Biden. I believe he's running for an office now. Sort of. Actually, Camilla Harris is running for the office. It was Joe Biden who first raised the possibility of employing the Logan Act, a moribund law that has never successfully been used, and it would not survive a constitutional challenge. It has to do with private citizens attempting to conduct foreign policy behind the scenes. But it was Joe Biden who raised the possibility of using the Logan Act against Mike Flynn, General Mike Flynn, whose career was destroyed as a kind of collateral damage for this investigation. It's shocking. It's shocking. But the public really should know about who this person was, who's now running for the highest office in the land. I, like every red-blooded American, would like to see people held to account for this. But it is important to understand that the law has this aspect of process where you have the laws. If somebody is seen to have breached the law, that they are held to account. That is a process not for you or me or the public to ascertain, but it's for a court of law. The real question here is, have these people actually committed crimes? It seems to me that in many cases they've leaked classified information. That's a felony. They seem to have destroyed evidence, a felony, and there are many other things. But there are two things here. One is this process. The other is the optics. What do the public have faith in the institutions, the Department of Justice, the FBI? Do they actually have our intelligence services? Do they have faith that these institutions are being impartially applied? Mm-hmm. And then they look at what's happened to General Flynn, mm-hmm. what's happened to anybody who seems to be in Donald Trump's orbit, what's happened to the president himself, this monolithic wall of hysteria. I mean, the Washington Post raised the possibility of impeachment something like 19 minutes after he was inaugurated. A wall of hysteria and, questioning the legitimacy of his election from the very beginning. That's on one side. And on the other side, you have Hillary Clinton, you have James Comey, John Brennan, all of these characters, all of this this kind of rogues gallery of actors. And so far, the only person who has been indicted has been a low-level FBI lawyer, the guy who altered an email, certainly as a felony. And he, even in his case, he pled. It's a very strange kind of pleading. It's not. It's as low level as it could be. But I think the public, insofar as they understand what this episode is about, is going to be very unhappy if it seems that there are really two standards of justice. One for Donald Trump and anyone who supports him, they get one kind of justice. Mm-hmm. And then the beautiful people on the other side, the people who support the Clintons and the deep state and the democratic agenda of dependency, they get another kind of justice. And that, of course, if that were seen to be the case, it would be the end. It would signal the fundamental illegitimacy of our legal system. And we would not be a country ruled by laws, but a country ruled by decree. And that would be too bad.
So that is the reason why we're doing the ObamaGate movie, and starring Dean Cain and Christy Swanson and John James, who many people might remember as Jeff Colby from
Dynasty. From Dynasty.
So
as you Americans say, Dynasty.
He's playing James Comey in a Boy Scout uniform.
Is he tall?
Yes.
James Comey is very tall.
But I think the point that you make, I think, is a really well one, and I know you've written an awful lot about this, is the destruction of public trust in all these institutions because of the behaviour of these people, this despicable behaviour, as you trace it from Hillary Clinton through to all these people, and the victims, people like Flynn. It's unbelievable what has happened to him. As you said, his life is destroyed and his life savings are gone. I thought that was a good one to mention. And for what? For what this man do compared to the actions of these other people? It's very disheartening.
The FBI agents who went to interview him, they came back and thought that he hadn't lied.
Correct. That's right.
So it's not clear what and the reports are called 302 reports on the interview have been heavily doctored by Peter Strzok, very unfairly treated.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that. We've now come to the end. We have two questions now we ask all viewees. First of all, what's your go-to recipe? What are you known for, family and friends, as your special dish? And tell us.
Okay. Well, there are a few, I suppose, but a real perennial favorite is beef Wellington. Ooh. And we make it both sometimes individually with the beef en croûte, and sometimes a big log with the crust over a big tenderloin, and usually there's a pâté de foie gras on top with some mushrooms and so on. Mm-hmm. It's very good. You have to get a cardiologist note before making it.
Yeah. And any special tricks that you have?
Yeah, any tricks with the making of that?
Well, the tricky thing actually is trying to make sure that the crust doesn't get soggy. The best trick for that is to sear the tenderloin properly, so it kind of seals in all of that delicious stuff.
And do you make your own pastry, or do you buy in pastry?
Well, we make our own in the sense that it's puff pastry but we don't make it from flour. We make it from puff pastry. If that's what you mean, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. And your favorite work of art that has meant something to you, has moved you, can be a painting, a play.
That sort of changes with my moods, but I happen to have here an illustration of Poussin's great painting, A Dance to the Music of Time, which is a painting that means a lot to me. In poetry, my favorite Shakespeare play is, of course, my favorite playwright is Shakespeare. My favorite Shakespeare play is Hamlet. In the 20th century, I probably T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. That's the greatest religious poem of the 20th century. That's a go-to poem. But on the lighter side, perhaps you both familiar with the poet Ogden Nash? Do you know his poem about martinis?
No.
There's something about a martini, a tingle, remarkably pleasant, a yellow martini. I wish I had one at present. There's something about a martini, ere the dining and dancing begin, and to tell you the truth, it's not the vermouth. I think that perhaps it's the gin.
Thank you so much. What a perfect end. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Roger. That's really great. I would want to make one comment, Roger. A lot of your choices there, white men, they're all about to go to the wall. A lot of students will never hear of them.
Yes, I'm afraid you're right. That's why we have to do what we can to working in the catacombs to preserve them.
Yes,
exactly. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye. Well, that's plenty of art, by the way, as well, that people have to look up. We have a lot of references there.
I might start drinking gin.
And by the way, I think so. By the way, what a great recitation. I think we got really lucky with that. But tell us about Bret Stephens then. What's Bret Stephens being up to?
Well, Bret Stephens has been on this program. He's a journalist, a never Trumper, although he probably would disagree with that description. But he has written about the New York Times 1619 project. Now, 1619 argued quite vociferously that the American Republic was not founded in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence. It was actually the founding moment of America was 1619 when the first slaves arrived on this continent. And this was a huge historical project. They won a Pulitzer Prize for it. And then the blowback began from historians, and not right-wing historians, left-wing historians, and even historians who they had used as fact-checkers on the original project. And they said, this is not true. And they also claimed that a lot of that the American Revolution was not a revolution against the king and indirect taxation. It was actually a revolution against to preserve slavery. And they said, this is nonsense. So Bret goes through in the New York Times in a lengthy essay.
And I have to say, lengthy essay, but an essay well worth reading. I highly recommend it.
And he devastates the New York Times. And he's particularly devastating about the stealth edits they do. Because when the New York Times got so much blowback about saying that 1619 is the founding year, is when America was actually founded, not 1776, that it became untenable, and rather than admitting it and printing a correction, they went in and stealth edited the original and removed it, and then put the project into schools. And Bret felt that was the reason why. Well, he said it's an important topic of national importance and has national debate, and it would be remiss of him not to discuss it in his column in the New York Times. And he also felt it going into schools raised the stakes.
Yeah. And it's amazing actually what they had written. I mean, what they had written and what they then suddenly taken out stealthily, as film says, by the New York Times. Here's the line. They said, 1619, it's not a year that most Americans know as a notable date in our country's history. Those who do are at most a tiny fraction of those who can tell you that 1776 is the year of our nation's birth. What if, however, we were to tell you that this fact, which is taught in our schools and unanimously celebrated every 4th of July, is wrong, and that the country's true birth date, the moment of its defining contradictions, came first into the world was in the August of 1619. And stealthily, they removed the line that says, what if we were to tell you that this fact, which is taught in our schools and unanimously celebrated, is wrong? They just took that out without explanation. Yeah. So they suddenly then, cleaned that up, didn't explain, didn't do corrections.
And in fact, the author, the editor of this project said, I never said that.
Oh, yeah.
And she did, actually. And she just removed it and deleted it. So a complete takedown, and it really got to the heart.
Bret's essay.
So the New York Times Guild then yesterday, that was Bret's article appeared Friday or Saturday.
Earlier in the week.
No, Bret's article, hold on, let me get this right. Bret's article appeared at the weekend, and then earlier in the week, just not long after it appeared, the New York Times Guild published a tweet saying, it says a lot about an organization when it breaks its own rules and goes after one of its own. The act, like the article, reeks. Reeks. And to be fair to the New York Times Guild, this tweet is better seen than read because it's full of grammatical errors. Right? So you have the New York Times reporters calling for, really saying that there should be increased censorship of its own reporters by management, being ungrammatical, and actually taking sides in an argument of national importance.
Yes.
And it's like, that's not really your job, actually. That's the job of the journalists and the columnists. But now, I think that tweet created such a blowback among the few decent journalists who were left in the New York Times that they objected so much that it was then removed. So watch this space. I'm sure the saga will go on and on.
But now we're going to go to this second interview we have today.
Yes, Mark Sutherland. So Mark Sutherland, he is a British author, actually a retired banker who, come author, and his grandfather, Halliday Sutherland, as he says in the interview, the family lore was that he was this extreme Catholic who took on a saint and, had this lengthy court case, and even the historians and the BBC all agree on this. Then he found the transcript of the trial and started researching the actual circumstances of the trial and came up with this great story, and he's written this book called Exterminating Poverty, and it just arrived. We've been reading a little bit about eugenics recently, and this just arrived in through the post. He's a big fan of The Scoop, apparently, and he just sent it to us, and wow, we thought we had got to have him on. So let's go over to the interview with Mark. Mark Sutherland. I interviewed him earlier, and let's hear that interview now. So I'm joined now by Mark Sutherland, who has had an interesting background. He was born in Singapore, grew up in Malaya, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Australia, and has worked in banking and financial services, and is somewhat an unlikely author of a book about eugenics. But the reality is he has a family connection to it. His grandfather was involved in a famous court case with Mary Stopes in almost 100 years ago. And Mary Stopes, for people who don't know, she's the British Margaret Sanger, and they were both contemporaries and both big promoters of birth control, abortion, etc. The founding mothers of the birth control, but also the founding members of the eugenicist movement as well. So Mark's grandfather, Halliday Sutherland, Dr. Halliday Sutherland, was involved in a famous court case with Mary Stopes, a libel court case. And it's been portrayed, you go on Wikipedia and you look at the internet, it's been portrayed as this arch bigoted Catholic taking on heroic Mary Stopes on the issue of birth control. And that's the way it's been portrayed in the history books. And even I think, Mark, you say in this book, it was portrayed that way within your own family. And it was only when you started researching it independently, you discovered that was not correct, that there was more to this. So tell us how you first came into this and what you discovered.
Well, thank you, Philip. And I'd like to start by saying I'm absolutely thrilled to be interviewed and to see you from this angle, because I've been a great fan of the show and started to follow your work when you started to fund for Gosnell and all the shenanigans you had then. So really delighted to be here.
Well, it's amazing. We have been doing a lot of research on eugenics recently, and I don't think we even mentioned it on the show. And then out of the blue, I get this book from this guy in Australia about an English guy who was involved in a court case, and it's about eugenics. And we thought, that's amazing. It's like someone's been reading our mind. So sorry for interrupting you, but we were so shocked when we got this that I just read it in one sitting. So tell me more about what you've discovered in the background.
Okay. I was born in 1960, and that was 6 months after Dr. Sutherland died. Mm-hmm. And so I was named Halliday. My middle name is Halliday, named after him. And for a number of years, I wondered about him. He was well known in his time. He was famous, met heads of states from time to time. And he had a long and interesting life. And he also wrote about it in autobiographies. Mm-hmm. Which sold well in his time. So even though I never met him, I was able to try and understand him and get to know him through his books and his work. Now, at some stage, I found out that he'd been in this big trial with Dr. Stopes. And while Stopes is still famous today, and, I think 6, 7, 8 biographies have been written about her, Halliday Sutherland's been largely forgotten. Mm-hmm. And so he's always recalled. Anyway, cut to the quick. In 1921, she opened a birth control clinic in Holloway in London. This was presented by the biographers of Dr. Stopes. Yes. This was presented as a family planning clinic. And then I wondered, well, this was at a time when women were having 12, 13, 14 children in poor parts of London. Why would he be so vehemently against this? Why would he write about it and put in a book that she was exposing the poor to experiment? It just seemed a bit extreme. Now, when I looked into it, it was in the biographies of Stopes. They told me it was, well, this fellow, he's a Catholic convert, so he's basically a toe-cutting zealot who says, get back to your kitchen sink, woman. I'm chaining you there now. And so that didn't match up with my family's recollection. That didn't match up with my family's Catholicism. And that's when I began to look into it further.
You managed to do something quite wonderful. You managed to get the transcripts of the trial, which is like gold dust for a historian, for someone writing history. And of course, Mary Stopes, there are many archives, and she was a prodigious letter writer, and So there's a lot of in her, as we say, and again, this feeds right into what we do. We do verbatim trials. We did the Harvey Weinstein trial. We did Gosnell. We did Ferguson. So that's why this book really appealed to us in so many ways. And I think rather than go to the trial, I mean, let's look at what Stopes really was. I mean, the first thing that really struck me was, that, well, first of all, she saw herself as God's prophet. She believed she had a message from God. But the logo of her mother's clinic in London. So she opens this mother's clinic, and you look at it, and it's like, you would know what I'm talking about here. It's like the TARDIS from Doctor Who, the beacon. It is. That's what it reminded me of. And as you say, the logo of the mother's clinic depicted a cylindrical lantern casting rays of lights in all directions. The protective cover of the lamp appeared to be a mesh of fine wire, although on closer inspection, it was the words birth control, repeated many times over and over. Below the slogan. Below, and then there was the slogan, joyous and deliberate motherhood, a sure light in our racial darkness. There was a bit more going on here than birth control.
Absolutely, there was. And as I say in the book, it was, to begin with, in its first year, quite poorly attended. About 2.5 women a day were going to the clinic. But then reading into it, there were little clues, like you've mentioned, the logo. And then she sets up the society to back the clinic. So you look at the name, and it's always presented, or not always, but in the main part presented as the CBC, the Society for Constructive Birth Control. You go to her papers, you learn quite quickly that it's the Society for Constructive Birth Control and Racial Progress. So that switches your eugenics ears again. You then learn about the brands of contraceptives she gave out there. The first brand was her pro-race cervical cap, and then racial brand later on. So
yeah.
It was a eugenic project. And if I could just add too, for the society, for just a single location, it's a small, I don't know if you've seen a picture of a clinic, but it's just basically a shop front and just an upstairs, and that's it. So it's quite a small building. And yet when you look at the people who served on the society, she's got some of the most eminent names of her time.
Absolutely.
Like John Maynard Keynes, George Bernard Shaw. He was a supporter, though he wasn't a vice president. H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell. She's got everybody there. So it's like, I don't know, you're running a church fete, but you've brought in all your biggest contacts. And so why do you need such big names behind you?
Yeah, because, I mean, people don't know, but eugenics, which it was a racial attempt to racially purify society, but also, I mean, even within the white race, it was an attempt to racially purify the white race. I mean, I'm just looking at what she wrote in a Daily Mail column here. Are these puny-faced, gaunt, blotchy, ill-balanced, feeble, ungainly, withered children the young of an imperial race? Why has Mrs. Jones had 9 children, 6 died, 1 defective? Nor is it for Mrs. Jones to take the initiative. Isn't it for the leisured, the wise, to go to her and tell her what the facts of life are, the meaning of what she is doing and what she ought to do? Mrs. Jones is destroying the race.
Yes.
So it was obviously about stopping people of color from reproducing, but it was to purify the white race as well, to make it, a pyramid of excellence.
That's correct. And I think in the context of what's going on at the moment, it can be quite confusing. On the one hand, you've got what I would call scientific racism, which is Darwinism, which is people like Francis Galton, Sir Francis, who invented eugenics, or invented it in its modern form. And he went out traveling around Africa and said, look, these people are inferior to the white races. So that's traditional racism, which back then would have been scientific racism. Eugenics is, sometimes I describe it as racism by white people on other white people. They perceived back then that, the Scots, the Irish, the Welsh were very, very different people. But effectively what they did was they looked at the poor, working class and poor in Britain's cities. And they just said, look at the bad condition these people are in. Now, one way of saying, yeah, disease, tuberculosis was rife, which is how Dr. Sutherland got involved.
Yeah.
But they looked, and people like, I don't know, Carl Pearson, who was Galton's protege, and he was the first professor of eugenics at London University. He said, look, we've had these reforms. We've tried some slum clearances. We've had, various schemes to improve the conditions of the poor. But have we produced another Arkwright? Have we produced another James Watt or a Sir Walter Raleigh?
Yeah.
He said, look, it's all very well improving the conditions of the poor, but what you're basically doing is you are supporting people who are too weak. And if you didn't have social Darwinism, these people would perish. And by keeping them alive, you are denigrating the British imperial race. And at the time, what kept the eugenists awake at night was that, the lowest quarter of society was the most prolific at a time when the birth rate was falling anyway.
Yeah.
And they used to talk about racial degeneration or even race suicide.
Yeah, I should say the book is Exterminating Poverty by Mark Sutherland in conjunction with Neil Sutherland.
That's correct.
Yes. So Halliday Sutherland, he was accused, he converted to Catholicism, I think, after the First World War. He was anti-eugenics before this because of the big tuberculosis scientific debate. There was a debate about whether TB was nature or nurture, right?
Yes.
So they had found this bacteria that they believed caused TB, and was but the eugenicists argued no, it was because people were weak and inferior that they got TB. And he always said, no, there's a scientific reason for it. And they were saying, no, it's a racially, they're inferior people. They're just bad breed. What was it? That they.
You've got narrow lungs.
Yes.
And round shoulders and et cetera, et cetera.
The usual.
So they said, yes, there is bacteria involved. But if you weren't such a poor, badly bred, bad genes person, then you wouldn't have this disease. And by keeping the tuberculous people alive, you're actually, one fellow described it as raising a race of hothouse flowers. And it's like, if the British race was a garden, you are now cultivating the weeds.
Yeah. I mean, I love this line. He described, self-styled, your grandfather described self-styled eugenicists as race breeders with the souls of cattle breeders.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's where he was even before he converted to Catholicism. And, then he wrote a book. Mary Stopes opened her clinic. He wrote a book with a brilliant title, actually. People think there's, it was a pamphlet, actually, Do Babies Build Slums, which he then expanded into a book attacking Malthusians who felt there were too many people. And I mean, his arguments against Malthusianism would stand up today. He could see that even back then that science was increasing the ability to produce food and supplies for the increasing population. There was, so even back then, I mean, now with the scientific advances we have, you can see it's more believable. Back then, I suppose that we were in the scientific age back then, but he was attacked for a lot of things. He was attacked for being a Roman Catholic, and it reminded me, there was Mary Stopes and her defenders. Definitely, the dogma lives within them. Was very much
very topical. Yes. Yeah.
To be topical, definitely. So the book was not just an attack on birth control, but it was an attack on her eugenics, and she sued him for libel.
Yes.
And one of the things very interesting, Gosnell, who was all funny. Gosnell had a eugenicist thread to him too, because he
right, okay,
his own race. He didn't like his own race. He felt that the black people were needed his help.
Yes.
And he was quite fond of experimenting on women, as was Mary Stopes with her gold pin method of birth control. So, Stopes was quite, as you say in the book, witnesses often ruin cases. And I think Mary Stopes perhaps ruined her case, because in the witness box, she said things like, that she was not looking for a reduction. Her birth control clinic was not looking for a reduction, quote, in the total birth rate, but a reduction at the wrong end of the social scale and an increase at the right end of the social scale.
Yes. Well, Philip, as you're saying that, it reminds me that when I started to look at it and I got the transcript of the trial and I saw those words, it was probably, like some of the times it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm up late, I'm searching for stuff. And then I find that and I'm like, hang on, you fellows never mentioned that to me before, but it was smack center of the trial.
Yeah.
But somehow no one had actually put that into the biographies.
Yes.
And that
yes.
really summed it up. Can I just add one other thing too, which is that he had libeled her, he had defamed her, and so it was up to, for her to prove, look, you've been defamatory, people think worse of me. Now you prove that it's true. You prove it's justified. So she had no obligation to appear in the trial at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at all the witnesses in the trial, she was probably the best from Sutherland's point of view and the worst from her own point of view.
Yeah, this is the thing that people don't realize about British libel law. It's one of the few cases where you have to prove your innocence. Normally in a criminal trial, the prosecution has to prove your guilt. You can just sit there. They have to prove it. It's not up to you to prove your innocence. In a libel trial, you go in and you have to prove that what you said was justified, that you said was truthful. They don't have to prove it was untruthful or unjustified. So it's one of the few places where the defendant has to, the burden of proof is not on them. But there was so much, she was quite open in her letters that this trial was about increasing book sales, but also about having a go at the Catholic Church. She seemed to be very anti-Catholic.
Yes.
She, as she says, she's keen to expose the harm that Roman Catholics are doing to this nation as a whole,
yes,
and how Catholic editors in newspapers posing as Protestants, which is an interesting way of going about it. We're posing as Protestants and we're suppressing information about Stopes and other matters. And she wanted to expose the ruling gang of Roman Catholics.
In the Daily Mail.
Yes,
the ruling gang of Catholics.
The ruling gang
and actually, I felt sorry for her barrister because he gets this brief, which is what I think about 70 or 80 pages long, not pages of A4, A3. So it's a big document, and you've got allegations of the ruling gang of Catholics, and she goes through the editorial board of the Catholic Journal, the Tablet, and the supporting evidence is, this fellow is a Catholic, this fellow, he's Irish, and so that's sort of shorthand, and you'd be familiar with that.
Yes, yeah. So I suppose we should really, tell people what eugenics was, because lots of people don't know what it is. So tell people, what eugenics was and why people should care about eugenics now, as well as this very interesting case.
Okay. Well, what eugenics was, Sir Francis Galton, he was the cousin of Charles Darwin. And Darwin writes Origin of Species and about the survival of the fittest. Sorry, I'm getting that confused with Spencer. But an animal has to be fit for their environment to survive. And Galton looks and he says, well, look, works with pigs, works with horses, works with cattle. I wonder if we could breed good humans. So that was his good idea. Now, his insight was that there was no real way of finding out, but he was a statistician. And so what he did was he applied statistics to see the correlation between the previous generation following.
Yeah.
So eugenics, as he defined it, was the control of agencies or control of social agencies under our control, which we can use to improve the race. Now, I think it's an important definition because sometimes people sort of say eugenics, and then if you're doing a documentary, you make some creepy, spooky noises and people go, oh, that's bad. But according to Galton's definition, you could give fresh milk to children in schools to help them have healthy bones. And you could argue that that was eugenic. So the thing is, it's very, very important to define between good eugenics, as it were. Although if you do something like give milk in schools, don't pitch it as, hey, this is really good eugenics, okay? Just a tip. But the other side, which is negative eugenics, which is prohibiting or reducing. And Stopes going through that, giving out the contraceptives to stop the poor from having the children. And while she's giving out her contraceptives, she's lobbying the prime minister, she's lobbying parliamentarians for the compulsory sterilization of the poor.
Yeah. And then I suppose you come forward to modern day where we're aborting babies who have Down syndrome.
Yes.
Where there is sex selection abortion in many parts of the world. And, not just, India or Pakistan, it's in Pakistani communities in England now. And even in Minneapolis, there was a story, a feel-good story in a local paper in Minneapolis a few years back, where the local maternity hospital were going, oh my God, we've just had 17 boys born in a row. We've never had that before. What are the odds? And the newspaper failed to mention that this was in a heavily Somali community. Sex selective abortion is more frequent there. So we have that. Is that a continuum?
Yes, it is. It is a continuum. And the overall theme is population control. Because under Malthus, it was effectively the iron law of Malthus was that increasing population leads to famine, pestilence, war. And it was disastrous. I mean, you would know the Irish famines, 1845 to 52?
Yeah.
It was a British colony, or it was an English colony at the time. While it was going on, all of the food was still being exported from Ireland. And if somebody said, hey, let's go and do something about this, these people are starving to death, Malthus was a good fallback position to say, no, these fellows, they got families of 8 children, and look, what can we do? It's the iron law of Malthus.
Yes.
And so utterly disaster. Bringing it forward into eugenics and the selective breeding there, I think where it's relevant today is that eugenics in the popular conception came to an end in 1945. You had the Third Reich, you had the gas chambers, and the T4 program put all the disabled people to death.
Hitler famously, looked to the American eugenicist program to bring about his final solution.
Yes, and the Americans got it from the British. So when the balloon, or when the proverbial hits the fan, what then happens is there's some people in trouble for it in Germany, and meanwhile the British eugenicists sort of start to walk backwards without being seen and whistling amongst themselves and nothing to do with us. Look at these terrible people. But even though in the popular conception that word came to an end, it never ended. They moved on to bigger and better things. The president of the Eugenics Society was Huxley, Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley's brother. He goes off to UNESCO to do his thing there. Other people, they're still going. And what they learn very quickly is to change their language. They don't talk about the inferior. They don't talk about undesirables. Or as Stopes put it, the spawn of drunkards or hordes of defectives. You know, in a modern state post-war Britain, you're not really going to get much traction using that language. But the ideology didn't go away. What they learned was to change the labels, to change the names, to change the language. And so as I made the point in the book, you've got the referral to morons and to defectives. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the pejorative terms that you call out in your car when you shake your fist at somebody cutting into you on your freeways, they all come from eugenics. It's just appalling.
And they were scientific terms back then.
Absolutely. But the thing is that it is relevant today because the ideology lives on. And so, for instance, there is one geneticist now who I was reading an article by him. Do you remember earlier in the year there was the stir about Andrew Sobieski being an advisor to the British government?
Yes.
And he got kicked out because of eugenics, and he had eugenic views. Well, one article I read in the newspaper was a geneticist at University College London poo-pooing his views. And so the article starts off saying, well, Zabiskie said this, and this is terrible, and that in but any other name is eugenics. And so you think, oh, that's terrible. You get later into the article, and he starts to take Zabiskie apart, not because it's morally wrong. He starts taking him apart, saying, you fool, you don't know what you're talking about. We don't know how to select for intelligence.
Yes.
But
if we did?
Reading between the lines, there's a Nobel Prize if I find out how to do it.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's how it's going.
Yeah.
No, so he says we can select for this condition, but not this. So the same thing's going on. He's just not going to make the same mistakes as his predecessors.
And they're going to put it in really ultra scientific expert terms, because that's what works nowadays. I mean, I don't want to spoil the ending for everyone, but this book has more twists. This court case has more twists and turns, and has this dramatic moment when the jury gives its verdict, and it's a verdict that throws the court into complete disarray.
Yes.
And the judge has to decide what the verdict really is. The case then goes to the Court of Appeal, which overturns the judge's decision, and then it goes all the way to the British House of Lords, which is a pretty unusual set of circumstances. But this case was so big and the jury's verdict raised so many issues that it had to go to the highest court of the land. And so people should read this, Exterminating Poverty by Mark Sutherland in conjunction with Neil Sutherland, and it's available on Amazon.com. Anything else you want to say about the book before we move on to our two questions?
Okay. No, thank you for reading it. I'm really glad you're interested.
Yeah.
I must say it was a struggle writing it because I was doing new research, new ground, seeing the obstacles that you had to overcome to make Gosnell and stuff helped. Also seeing the way you do the court dramas helped as well, because I was very, very aware that if I was to write a book and say, oh, well, Mark Sutherland, grandson of this fellow, says this, they'll say, who the hell are you? But if I say, well, hang on, listen to what your heroine said.
Yeah.
Don't argue with me, argue with her.
Don't think I've read a book in a long time that has as many footnotes and references. I mean, there's, you have a chapter and almost you come to the end of the chapter and then you've got page after page of reference and footnotes. So it's very heavily referenced. As you say, it's all their own words. It's not funny. It's Mark Sutherland in conjunction with Neil Sutherland in conjunction with the court transcript. And
that's right.
It's very heavily verbatim. You really try and stay out of it and let them condemn themselves. So we always ask our guests two other questions. What's your go-to recipe that your family like or your friends like, and where did it come from, and how do you make it?
Well, Philip, the first thing is I sort of asked my dear wife. I said, well, what's my go-to recipe? And there was a bit of a pause. No, she was kind. She was kind. But I guess it would be penne or spaghetti puttanesca, because it's easy and it's delicious.
Mm-hmm. And for those of us who may not know what that is, tell us what that is and how you make it.
Okay, you crush garlic, and you get about 10 anchovies, about 3 cloves of garlic, 10 anchovies. You chop it up very finely and begin to fry it. Then when that's going, what you do is you put in tomato paste. Sorry, not tomato paste. Cancel that. You put in crushed tomatoes. And then you put in olives and capers. Be sure to drain the capers, and continental parsley, and I said olives, and the ingredient I've forgotten.
Okay, sounds lovely. Sounds lovely.
Thank you.
So we also ask people about a work of art that has moved them, a play, a poem, a painting, a song. Tell us what yours is.
My favorite piece of art is in the Basilica of St. Margaret in Cortona in Italy. And it's an absolutely beautiful church. But if you go in, go up to the high altar, or on the left, there's a side altar or an apse. And on the wall there is a war memorial for the Italian Courtenay's soldiers who fell in the First World War. And there is the most beautiful metaphorical painting that is absolutely breathtaking. Now, in case any of your viewers or listeners speak Italian, block your ears because I'm about to say the name of the Italian artist. It was Osvaldo Bignami. And if you're Italian, it sounds like somebody sort of pulling. But that's the best I could do. But the surname is Bignami, if you wanted to look.
Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
It was amazing to receive this book through the post. If you, by the way, anyone out there who's writing books or anything, please do send them to us. Let us know what you're doing, because this was just this is what we've been spending a lot of time looking at this story, and it's a very interesting story that is not. There should be in every school. People should know about the history of the eugenics movement.
They should, because I think otherwise they're going to just be completely blindsided by this is science, we know best, and forget where this stuff really comes from.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a great delight for me too. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Anne.
Bye.
What an amazing interview. And by the way, if you go down the rabbit hole, of eugenics, it's quite the world. You start to find some extraordinary creatures. I mean, he mentioned some of the people there, but I found Helen Keller. So, like Helen Keller was a huge eugenist. And here's one of the things she said, by the way. I just think it's worth...
remind people who everyone knows who Helen Keller is.
Helen Keller, who
was born
deaf and blind, and actually did a huge amount for the deaf and blind community.
And the disabled community.
By teaching people that the people who were born like that were able to live very, very full lives and contribute a great deal to society. And I think she was very involved with the education of people like that, with those disabilities. So just an incredible person who's highly celebrated. But here's a side of her that perhaps not enough attention was ever given to. Here's what she said. Our puny sentimentalism has caused us to forget that a human life is sacred only when it may be of some use to itself and to the world. She called for physicians' juries for defective babies who would then vote on which children would be kept alive and which would not. It is the possibility of happiness, intelligence and power that give life its sanctity, and they are absent in the case of a poor, misshapen, paralysed, unthinking creature.
And she added that allowing a defective child to die was simply a weeding of the human garden that showed a sincere love of true life.
Absolutely extraordinary. But as I said, if you start to go down the rabbit hole of eugenics, it is an extraordinary, and we're going to be coming back to this topic. It really is extraordinary, and it kind of was interesting this week. And I know the show is going a little bit long, but I just wanted to mention this. You may have noticed that the Nobel Prizes were given out, and this week, Jennifer Doudna, a UC Berkeley professor, shared the prize in chemistry with someone else. But I wanted to get to the point of what she got it for. What did she win the Nobel Prize for? And, I guess the simplest way, this is her quote. Well, I guess the simplest way to say it, that it's for the technology of gene editing, which means, as I think, the Nobel Committee even worded it this way, changing the code of life. So it's a way to alter DNA with precision and accuracy in cells to control cells' fate and even the properties of an entire organism.
Yeah, this is the scientist saying
this. This is the scientist saying this.
She goes on to say, it puts into science's hands just extraordinary power to manipulate genes in ways that could lead to cures for genetic disease, to altering crops, to being able to deal with climate change. And then there are all kinds of research questions that require genetic manipulation.
And it goes on. I mean, we really probably shouldn't go. But basically, the breakthrough that she has gotten the Nobel Prize for is a breakthrough that will allow for genetic manipulation and the weeding out, by the way, of defective genes that we don't like. So when people, wonder if they're watching this show and they're thinking, why the hell are these ones talking about eugenics? It hasn't left us. It's still there, and it's something that people should be really concerned about. I mean, one of the questions that the New York Times asked this scientist who's just won that Nobel Prize, they asked her, is there any way of putting the genie back in the bottle? And she said, no.
I think it's fair to say that all the most evil things on the planet always come in the guise of science or kindness.
Or it's good for you. And by the way, they asked her...
Science, not it's good for you. We are being good to you.
Yeah, and by the way, when they said, is there any way of putting the genie back in the bottle, of slowing things down? She said, in a word, no. And she laughed. Kind of scary there. Yeah. Last thing we want to do today, and you're going to see, we're going to go out in the patio and do this right now. But basically, so the first photograph you're seeing right now is have loved this particular appetizer, this tapas that we get in a restaurant here in Santa Monica, and it's called fig and goat cheese tostadas. Yum 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 yum. Now you see what they've done there in these ones. That they've got some nice blackberries on the top. I decided to try to back engineer this with a little flair of our own, try to do something slightly different. So what we're doing here is, and I just think if you like goat's cheese, which who doesn't love goat's cheese, by the way, and figs, which are in season and which are magnificent and gorgeous in every possible way. 2 different types of figs that I'm using. I tried with fresh figs, but I also tried with dehydrated figs. Very, very nice concentrated figure.
Dried figs.
Dried figs. What did I say?
Dehydrated.
Yeah, anyway. So basically... I think the way to do this, and I think we're going to have to experiment on this a few times, but what I've done on this occasion is I toasted the bread first. And then a little trick when you're working with goat's cheese, because it can get very crumbly and start to fall off, put it into the microwave. Break off as much as you want of the goat's cheese, put it into a microwavable dish and put it into the microwave for like 15 seconds. And it'll become quite creamy and easy to manipulate, and it'll stick on the toast.
On behalf of people everywhere, say not too much goat's cheese?
Yeah, you'll see that. And then basically we're going to put either fresh, whichever you prefer, by the way, but we kind of really both did a taste test here. We preferred the dried figs. So basically put your goat's cheese, then put your fig on, and then on top of that, my little secret ingredient was pomegranate molasses. So what I would do is put some of the pomegranate molasses on top of that, drizzle that with a little bit there, not too much of it, or with some honey, put it under the grill for a minute, and it is a really, really simple and gorgeous appetizer that people will appreciate.
So you spread the goat's cheese on, you toast both sides first?
First of all, I toasted the bread. I used some sourdough bread there. You could use crostini, little pieces of French.
Do you toast it or bake it?
So I toasted the bread first, Philip. I toasted the bread first,
yes.
But you could put it in the oven.
No, I'm just saying.
And actually, by the way, in fairness, take that back, my tone there with you, Philip. Actually, if you wanted to do it for a crowd, actually, good point, Philip. You want to actually do it in the oven because you don't have to be constantly throwing it in and out of the toaster. Look at you, well done, Philip. Sorry. So basically, yes, put it onto a big baking tray, and cut your bread quite thin, because the crispier it is, the nicer it is. Actually, super, super thin. And I would toast that on both sides. And then I would toast it again when you put everything on top of it. Yum, 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 and serve it warm. And with a lovely, I would serve that with a really nice, like an Albarino, or with a Sauvignon Blanc or something like that. Yum, 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 yum. They're really nice. Super sweet. They're actually super sweet. When we had them, the last time we had them, it's almost like a dessert, but actually it's a very nice appetizer. Very nice thing to have, canapes, if you're having friends around. But of course, you're not allowed to have friends around. So you can just have your own little family around and have them, or have them on your own. Why not? Yum, 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 yum.
Not too much.
And by the way, if you're doing it on your own, use the toaster. Makes life even easier.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay.
That's it for this week.
Don't forget to donate to ObamaGateMovie.com, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.